You're listening to the Bible Uncut and Unfiltered. We believe the Bible doesn't need to be watered down or cleaned up to be understood. Our goal is to provide a healing place to discuss the questions you can't ask and the context you won't learn in church. I'm your host, Colin Connor. Now, on to the episode. All right, everyone, welcome to number 100. This is our 100th pour. 100 episodes of peeling back the layers of faith, scripture, and our own assumptions. Cannot believe that this thing started over 2.5 years ago now, just spawning out of teaching a Sunday school class, and when we had to leave that church, just wanting to continue our study with some friends, and really just through word of mouth. Like, we haven't done any kind of fancy marketing or paid anything for that. This has just been word of mouth as people have liked it and shared it with friends. We have now gotten to 100 episodes. And so, for this, I have with me, as you just heard, my lovely wife, editor, occasional co-host, sitting approximately 50 feet to my left because we don't have a fancy enough setup here to do two mics at the same time. Jana, welcome back to the pod.
Hello. Yes, I got tired of sharing a microphone. I wanted my own, so we worked it out.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, honestly, that sounds like a cause for marital counseling, but really it's just because it's hard taking the mic and switching back and forth. Like, it just does not work that way at all.
Yeah, does not make for consistent audio quality.
No, and my OCD does not like that at all. I would much rather be in a separate room for an hour while we record. But Jana is here because, honestly, I could not have gotten the podcast to where it is without her. You don't see her on here too often. Every once in a while pops in for a special episode, but doing probably just about as much work as I put in study-wise on the back end, she puts in with the editing and doing all the social media posting. I'm sure she is sick of hearing my voice by now, so it is a miracle she's allowed us to get this far with it. So big thank you to her for helping out so much with this project. It is truly a labor of love. This is not something that we make money off of. You may have noticed we do not do any ads. And we don't do paid content. I don't do a fancy Patreon or anything like that. And that's really just because I firmly believe that good Bible scholarship needs to be accessible to people at no cost. And I don't see enough of that. There are a lot of people out there doing really good Bible scholarship, but it's behind paywalls. And we all have a lot of expenses right now in our lives that adding on, even if it's just another like $5 a month or something for a pod, it's too much of a hassle for a lot of people. So I want to make sure we keep putting out good content free of cost, but that does mean it takes a lot out of us to do, and I could not do it without her. But we are excited now to be able to look back on this past year. It's actually been a little over a year since we did kind of like a year in recap, because we hit 50 back last August. So it's taken us a little bit longer this year to hit our next 50, but it has been a heck of a year. We've had some awesome stuff. We actually had more guests on the podcast this year than we had in the previous years. We had 7 or 8 first-time guests on the podcast this year, I believe, if I counted it correctly, and some really great episodes in there. We were able to get through the first 12 chapters of Exodus, which was huge for me. I wanted to get that done this year because, we got through the first, I believe it was 11 of Genesis last year, and I feel like too often churches just focus on the go-to passages in the New Testament. And even though those are very important, you can't really understand even your favorite New Testament passages without understanding where the story begins. And so much of the rest of the Bible comes from the opening chapters of Genesis and Exodus that it was really important to me we get that down before we go anywhere else. So I would love to do more of Exodus. I would love to do more of Genesis in the future, but I wanted to at least get those out of the way. And Exodus 1 through 12 took us 16 episodes to get through, which I was actually kind of proud of, that I was able to keep that to almost 1 episode per chapter instead of like Genesis where it was going to be like 2 or 3 per chapter. So I feel like I've refined a little bit in this past year how much I go off on my rabbit trails.
Yeah, you came up with some different techniques to help recording go a little bit smoother, and I definitely think that helped a lot.
Oh yeah, for sure. back when I used to preach more frequently, I would actually script out my sermons, which is not something I ever recommend preachers do. That's like 1 in 100 can do that and have it make sense and be good for them. For most people, it's just going to be not worth the time and effort. But I always liked the way I was able to present the material when I had actually like thought through every single word. Now, not necessarily presenting it word for word as what I had on the page, but it just helps me. Sometimes I have way too much going on in my brain, and it's just like an ADD thing. I need to get it out on paper so it makes sense to people more than just me. So I've kind of gone into scripting the podcast episodes a little bit more lately, and that I think has definitely helped us as well. We started a little B storyline on the pod here, doing our track record series this year, which Jana has been on all three of those so far.
Yeah, I do really enjoy doing those.
I do too. I want a little bit more feedback from our listeners, what they think of that, because that's a little bit of a departure from what we usually do, but it's something that we have a lot more material for in the future, and I enjoy making those. They can be a little bit of a headache when you're going back and reading that ridiculousness. It can be a little mind numbing at times, but I think it's worth it for the finished product. I am already in the process of reading a couple more pamphlets for our next round, so I'm not sure exactly when that'll come out, and I think we may potentially even end up with another new guest on for that, but I'll just leave that there because that's not established yet for sure. But yeah, that's been fun. And honestly, in this past year, we have had some of my favorite episodes of the podcast so far. We have covered a lot of topics, not just like the verse by verse stuff like through Exodus, but even some of the one offs. Johanna, can you take a stab in the dark and guess what my favorite out of 100 episodes is so far?
Gonna say it was, and I'm gonna cheat for the name because I don't want to say the wrong thing. Sometimes I
She's
get
probably
these
going to
mixed up.
pull out one with like a guest that we had on here and be like, oh, it was this one. I'm going to be like, nah, it wasn't that. And that has nothing to do with the guest, but.
Okay, I'm glad that I looked because the one I was thinking of was not right. I'm thinking our Ecclesiastes series was your favorite.
Oh, Ecclesiastes was a lot of fun for me. I really enjoyed that. But I'm talking about like one specific episode of everything
Okay.
that we have done. A favorite episode. And technically, Ecclesiastes was last year's series.
All right. Okay.
And our seasons go all over the place on here. Like, technically, not that any of you care about this, but technically, we're on season 6 right now. And that's very arbitrary the way that I line those up. But the little bit behind the scenes that none of you care about is I kind of start the year off. Well, we start every January off. This is giving Jana time to think of the episode while I go off on my rabbit trail. We start off every year in January with the spiritual abuse episodes, and then usually we'll go into a relatively lengthy Bible study, like we did the first 11 chapters of Genesis, or last year we did Ecclesiastes, this year Exodus 1 through 12. And I consider each of those to be its own series. Technically, the Genesis one I actually consider to be two different seasons. Genesis 1 through 6 was season 1, and then 7 through 11, and some episodes after that were season 2. And then we'll have like a lot of one off stuff or mini series in the second half of the year since there's holidays, and it's easier with the calendar, I think, to do some more topical stuff. And that way, we don't just cater to the people who really like the verse by verse stuff, almost like a sermon, or just the people who like topical. We try to intersperse that throughout. So, our main thing that guides the seasons is technically our full on Bible series, but then I'll also do like a season in the second half of the year. So, yeah, technically, we're at the start of season 6 now.
Right. I'm back with my guess for a specific episode and not a
Yeah.
not a series. I'm so I have two guesses in case the first one's wrong.
Okay.
I'm gonna say the Star Wars episode that you did.
You are correct. That is, and not just because I'm a huge Star Wars nerd, okay? I legit think that is some of the best work that I have done in taking a very abstract concept and making it relatable and fun. And like, I went back and actually listened to some of that episode again recently, and I was just really proud of the way that that flowed and made sense. So I was kind of surprised that hasn't been a more popular episode, maybe just because we have a lot of listeners who aren't huge Star Wars fans, but look, I promise you, it is not just about Star Wars. It is as much about Christianity as it is Star Wars. So if you haven't listened, go back and check that one out. I don't know if you have thought through this too much, but I'm going to take a stab in the dark and say that our most recent episode before this, Psalm 88, may have been one of your favorites.
Yeah, I would say so. It was very memorable, and not just because I just finished editing it, but
It was so
because
memorable because it was last week.
right. Yeah, I would say it was probably one of my favorites because after I finished editing it, I'm we're weird. We'll be in the same house and we'll still send like WhatsApp messages to each other. So
Okay,
I
but that's because like I work from home and I have these headphones on most of the day where I'm listening to music or podcast or whatever. So I've just told her like you can be talking to me and I'm not going to hear you right off the bat. So it's gonna be easier to just get my attention with a text and then I'll come over and talk. Okay, we're not that millennial that we carry on the full on conversation over text. All right, let's not give the wrong idea there.
that is true. Yeah, because I just messaged him. I was like, hey, this one was really good. When one of them. You just really did a good job with it, and he came out. And he's like, "What? Really? You think so?" I was like, "Yeah, it was good. I really enjoyed it."
It's so weird. I feel like whenever I'm nervous about an episode or I don't feel like it came across as smoothly as I wanted it to, those end up being the better ones. And then whenever I'm really confident about, oh, this was a great one, that ends up being a rougher presentation for some reason. So I don't know why that is, but that has been the case. But Star Wars aside, this year has had some really good episodes. Like the one from a couple weeks ago of just the whole Bible in about an hour, the TLDR episode. That's one of my favorites because I'll give a little bit of background on that one that I didn't get to give in the episode. But if you listen to it, I take about an hour and I give you the entire story of the Bible from a Christian perspective, Genesis to Revelation. And that was originally spawned out of a single class that we had in college, which Jana's going to remember this as soon as I bring it up. But we had a class called Bible Archaeology and Geography. And there was a missions professor there. He was kind of over like the missions program. But for whatever reason, he had gone saddled with teaching Bible Arc and Geo. And he was the quirkiest person you would ever meet in your life, right? He had a personality all his own. God broke the mold when he made this man, right? There was no one else quite like him. And he was a very interesting teacher because he was a missionary first and foremost, so teaching was not like his first thing. His quizzes and tests were the absolute worst.
Oh, they're awful to stay for.
Oh yeah, I was a good student. Like I could get a bead on what the teachers wanted and anticipate, and like one teacher in particular, I knew right off the bat reading a chapter of the book, like okay, this is going to be one of his questions. Not this guy. I could just about memorize the chapter word for word, and still have no clue what his questions were going to be. And the worst thing is they would be like 5 to 10 question quizzes, so you miss a couple of them and you're screwed already. And none of us were getting perfect scores on his stuff. But anyway, that's a whole other thing. The reason I bring him up is every year he was notorious for this one class. He would get about halfway through Bible Arc and Geo and realize that the entire classroom was just totally lost. They were not understanding him at all. And so he would stop and just give you a chronological timeline of biblical events in a way that you have never heard anyone else present it before. And he was really good about trying to bring in events that were happening at the same time, but not necessarily in the Bible. Like here's a little bit of Egyptian history of what was going on at the same time that, maybe King David reigned or something. And then, here's what was going on in Assyria or Greece while we had the kingdoms splitting in Israel, whatever it might be. And he would actually pull up particular students and like lay them out on the floor to build the geography of Israel. He'd be like, all right, you stand right here, you're Mount Hermon. Or, you sit over here, you're wearing blue today, so you're the Sea of Galilee. It was the coolest thing ever. And the most wild thing, too, is he just so happened to be teaching that particular class. Again, it was just a once a year thing. And he was teaching that exact class the day that I visited the school. And so when I actually took the class when I went there, and he taught that it was kind of a brain explosion in a way, and I had never really heard people link together biblical history quite the way that he did. And it stuck with me for a while, and so that got me to a point where I wanted to do a more expansive version of that. He did it in a very limited scope, and he only had like 40 minutes in class. So that episode is actually like, oh gosh, I probably took that class in 2018 or so. So that was like 7 years in the making doing that study and just taking all my notes from all my Bible studies since then and coming up with that. So that was a lot of work, but a lot of fun. I also think one of my favorites from this past year has been our Prayer of Jabez episode.
Oh yeah,
And
that was a fun episode.
maybe I'm partial since I really loved that book when I was younger, but there was just something really special about going back and doing that review and seeing the good, the bad, and the ugly of it. So yeah, those were some of my favorites. And just as of this past week, we also get to start up kind of a psalm series. I will call it a series, but it's not going to be like what we've done with Genesis or Exodus or Ecclesiastes. It's just going to be one-off stuff here and there. Maybe we'll do an episode on Psalm 23. That'll probably be the next psalm we cover, or Psalm 1, or what have you. But that's not going to be like all at once like we've done some of the others. So those are just a few of the standout episodes for me, but we've also had some really awesome guests this year that I want to highlight. And I'm not trying to cover everyone here because I don't want to forget someone and miss anybody, but just some really great conversations. Just the first things coming to mind, starting the year with conversations on spiritual abuse with Rev Covery, Justin Gentry, and Sarah Heath. And I got to see Sarah at Beer Camp again a couple weeks ago. Having Jonathan Foster was one of my favorite guests this year, just because he is such an intelligent person. And I don't just mean book smarts, like emotional intelligence and just such a nice person to be around. Jan got to meet him a couple weeks ago at Beer Camp, and we actually got to meet his wife together too. And
Yes.
he introduced us to her and complimented our podcast. Like he brought it up first. I was like, oh, that's so meaningful. I love that. But Jonathan's an awesome guy. We had Jimmy Hinton on. I really loved the episode we did with Paul and Billy Horde on U Contamination. That was super special. We got to do the almost heretical crossover that I've been wanting to do since we started the podcast. So a lot of really, really cool stuff that we have gotten in this year.
And we already have some really amazing guests lined up for this coming January as well.
Yeah, I can't say too much on that yet because I don't like to throw out a name and then, you never know what happens, schedules change or whatever, and something might not go up at the same time you think it will. But Jan is right. We will tease a little bit more at the end of the episode what we have coming in the year ahead. But oh yeah, January and February are looking stacked with some incredible guests. So I am super, super pumped for that. So all in all, it has been a wild ride of a podcast year. And, I've been the one that's just like, I'm going to keep doing this until I die. Like I have way too much Bible content and way too many thoughts. I just need to get it out there into the world. Jana's the one who has been a little more down to earth, a little more reasonable, and be like, all right, let's get to 100 and then we can reevaluate at 100. So now that we are here at 100, well, what have been your thoughts on 2.5 years of podcasting? How are you feeling at this point in it?
Well, for those who have never done podcasting or do not know much about it, it's a lot of work.
Oh, yeah.
It's so much work, especially to the level that we're doing where we're posting an episode every Sunday and then we have a shorter video that goes out on Tuesday and then
She does a recommended resource every week. She does
I
a
try to
little
do it every
short,
week.
yeah, yeah.
I try to
Most
do it
weeks,
every week.
a little snippet that you advertise the episode that's coming out on Sunday too. Like you add that as well.
Mm. Yeah, I mean, obviously on Colin's end, he has a lot of study that goes into it, and that's very time consuming, but it's also very time consuming on my end because I'm
Oh yeah,
editing the episode, I'm finding a snippet from the episode in order to, make a little short out of it so that gets attention. And then any if we have a new series, then I have to come up with a graphic for whatever series or episode that we're doing, and that can be I enjoy that, but it's also time consuming. So sometimes I feel a little exhausted, I'll be honest, but if it
You just brought up something I don't think anyone else knows because I don't think I've mentioned that in the list of things you do. We don't keep a graphic designer on retainer.
yeah.
So, granted, Jenna has programs that give some templates and stuff, but she changes them around and makes them look really good. Like any of the graphics you see, I'm actually the one who has the graphic design. I wouldn't say training, but background. I did a little bit of graphic design work in college, but Jana does all of it for us. So any of those graphics you see that look great on social media, that is all her.
Yeah, if you love them or if you hate them, I've done them all.
I was waiting for you to say, if you love him, I did him. If you hated him, Colin did him.
Right, that's what I should have said, yeah. Throw you under the bus. But yeah, so that's how I'm feeling. But you know what? If it helps at least one person maybe stop and consider something that they hadn't considered Bible wise, or even, if they're in a more fundamental faith like we are, and they listen to an episode where we talk about, hey, this standard that they have, and maybe something feels a little bit off to you. Here's why that might feel a little bit off. Here's some things to consider. I know, uh, I kind of feel like maybe we get a little snarky in some of the yeah, in some of the
Both of our personalities, too.
yeah, we're very snarky people in person. Yeah, we don't necessarily mean to like turn anyone off. I don't know if I'm getting too deep in the weeds here.
No, it's a legitimate tension because, part of that is my personality. Part of it is I have come out of that and faced a lot of hurt and frustration
Mhm.
from multiple church experiences. So there's a balance between acknowledging that and expressing the real emotions of it, but also not trying to turn off people.
Yeah, and I feel like we try to have a little bit of balance where yeah, there's gonna be a little snark, there's gonna be a couple of comments made, but at the end of the day, we're just wanting to help people see that there is nuance to their faith and their beliefs.
Yes. Absolutely. This has been a very emotionally heavy year for me. I feel like at this point, I realize some of you may not have tuned on to hear all this behind the scenes stuff, but it's a special episode, and we don't usually like to clog up the actual episode talking about our lives or any behind the scenes. So this is kind of our chance to give you the year recap. And Jen is right. It takes so much effort to podcast. We got to talk to a lot of people at Beer Camp a few weeks ago, both some who already podcast and some who were interested in podcasting. I actually had 2 or 3 different conversations of people who were like, "Oh, I kind of want to get into podcasting. What do you think?" And basically, the first advice we give is like, "Don't." I had heard multiple stories of preachers back when I was in fundamentalist churches where somebody would say to them when they were younger, "If you can do anything other than preach, go do it." Like you have to be absolutely certain that this is what you are called to, what you want to do. And I mean, there's all kinds of issues with that and stuff we can talk about. But I kind of feel like I'm using that logic with podcasting a little bit. Like if you can go do any other hobby with your free time, go do it. This has to be something that, to quote Loki, you need to be burdened with glorious purpose. You have to have a little bit of a, I don't want to say higher calling and make it seem spiritual or woo woo, but like you have to have something that's going to keep you driving through this when you don't go viral, when you are in the hole every month with your website hosting and you don't have any money coming in on Patreon or anything like that. And this year, that really hit me a lot. I mentioned a little bit earlier that it took us a little longer to get to the second 50 episodes that did the first 50. And part of that's just been because life has happened a lot this year. We have had very busy schedules, and there have been some weeks where we've just had to say, we're going to skip a week or take off a little bit of time. Because coming out of fundamentalist churches, we were never allowed to put our own emotional or even physical health first. I mean, there is literally a story. This is from our last year at the church that we were at, where there was a tornado warning in our area, and people wanted to. It was on a Wednesday night, and we had a Wednesday night prayer meeting, and so most of the people either didn't want to go or like, let's just cancel the service because this could be dangerous. Now, in all fairness, here in New Jersey, we almost never get tornadoes. Like, we get the occasional tornado warning, but it rarely ever turns into much of anything. So, like, we knew it would probably be okay, but there's just kind of a common sense. Like, when you have people who are traveling a little bit and you have older people and children involved and all this, it's like, maybe just cancel it. It's okay. But the deacon who was in charge of this said, no, no, we're going to keep the service and just trust God to keep us safe. It's like, I think maybe God would have preferred that you just stay safe. There's that old story of the guy in the hurricane, and he was climbing on top of his house and kept complaining that God didn't send him the help that he prayed for. He'd pray, oh God, please send me help. And there's the guys that came across in a life raft telling him to get down, then a helicopter that came to tell him to get down, and all this. He's like, no, no, God's gonna save me. And then he gets to heaven and yells at God, why didn't you save me? He's like, I tried to. I sent you a life raft and a helicopter and all this, right? I just feel like sometimes we need that basic logic of sometimes God helps those who help themselves, and God expects us to have common sense, and God is not responsible for miraculously saving us when we do stupid things. But anyway, all of that sidetrack to say, like, we really did not have a precedent for taking care of ourselves, not just emotionally, but literally even physically in those circles. So it it was actually kind of hard for me to be able to say more than once this year, let's take a week off. I am not used to that. And it's been a lot. Like earlier this year, I didn't bring this up much on the podcast, if at all, but I took part in a course earlier this year called Atheism for Lent. It's hosted by Peter Rollins. It is fantastic. I will highly, highly recommend it. Rollins is this incredible philosopher, theologian, a little bit of everything. He is a jack of all trades, and his interests go in every possible direction. And every year he hosts this event that he calls Atheism for Lent, where it's through the entire spiritual season of Lent, and each week is a different set of arguments. So the very first week, he takes you through the best arguments for God's existence, for theism. And every single weekday is a different thinker, and you get excerpts from their writings. And then week two, he gives you the best arguments for atheism, and that negates week one. And then week three negates week two. He gives you the best arguments against those arguments. And it just keeps building and building, where every week negates the previous week. And so you'll be following along and be like, oh yeah, this totally makes sense. Like I think I could get on board with this. And then the very next week, everything that you learn just comes crashing down. It's like, nope, here's all the reasons that's wrong. And I had wanted to do that for several years now. I'd been aware of it, but I had never gotten the chance to take the course. As it's not that expensive, and it's a really good community too. Like, you have a whole WhatsApp group and everything that you chat in. I was not expecting that to throw me for as much of a loop as it did. Like, Jana will remember, I had so many existential crises. Like, every week I was having a new existential crisis from that.
It was bad, and I didn't know how to help him.
Right, because I'm putting in all this ridiculous philosophy and theology study, and I'm coming with these super heady concepts, and she's like, I just got off of work, like, I'm not ready to talk about this right now. But it was so good. But that it really showed me a lot of my own spiritual baggage that I thought I had worked through, and I didn't realize I had not worked through as far along as I thought I had. And so that's played into the podcast a little bit because, like Jana said, it is a very exhausting thing to do. And I'm not just trying to complain here, but it is a lot. And one of the hardest things is, like, back when I would preach in church, you would get feedback. At least in the kind of church that I came from, you would have the pastor stand in the back, and people shake hands after the service, and it was always all the platitudes. It's oh, that was a fantastic sermon, preacher. Yeah, that the best I've ever heard. It's all bullcrap. Like, they're just being nice, but at least you would get some feedback. And that has been one of the hardest things with the podcast, is losing the immediate feedback for the content. Not a ton of people comment. Now, in a little bit here, we're actually going to get into some comments people have given, so we do get some feedback. But like earlier this year, I tried to start Discord, And we still have it up, but we just have not had the level of engagement that I was hoping for with that. And I don't know if that's just because everyone's busy, people are on different platforms, if it's still just because we're a smaller podcast, but that has been the hardest thing for me is just not knowing, is this landing? Is this actually what people want to hear? Because I'm a weird person. I realize my interests are niche and my presentation is very unique. So I don't always know if what makes sense in my head is going to make sense to everyone else. So I hit several points this year where I wondered, is this something I want to keep going? And the problem for me is that I am just such a nerd where I feel like I have all of these different things that I have learned and I want to share with people because, again, I don't think that good Bible scholarship is freely available to most people. And I feel like if there is such a thing as a calling or a purpose in life, mine would be to share all of that. And it's been hard to find that work life balance and add in a hobby balance, especially when my 9 to 5 job has been really busy this year. But I think the more this year has gone on, the better we've gotten at it. I have felt less stressed with the podcast toward the end of this year than I did toward the start. Part of that may have been too, and again, this is super personal, but I'm going to throw it out there, is I actually started on antidepressants in the summer, which is something I had wanted to do for a long time. I realize some of you are going, why are you talking about this? Because I've talked a lot on the podcast about struggling with depression and anxiety and all of this. And in the circles I came from, that was a sin problem. You weren't really supposed to medicate it. And if you did, you were looked at a little bit funny. And so this is something that should have been done 15 years ago for me, but it took this long for me to feel comfortable enough to take that step. And honestly, it has been life changing. I just want to throw that out there because I can't help but imagine that some people listening probably struggle as well and have not taken those steps themselves to do the next thing they need to take care of themselves. So it's just been, what, about 4 months now, maybe a little less for me, probably about 3.
Mhm.
It has been a tremendous difference in my life. Everyone's different, so I'm not going to promise you this is a cure all, but it has helped me even in working with the podcast.
Yeah, I was really proud of him for taking that step and, getting an antidepressant pill. And I, like he said, it's really helped. I've noticed a big difference. And it takes a lot of courage to take that step because medications, for me, anyway, medications can be a little scary because there's side effects. You never know how it's going to interact with your body. If it doesn't
Sure.
help, then it's a confusing path to figuring out. But so far, so good.
Oh yeah. And add all the spiritual villainizing of it too. Like that, even though I hadn't believed that in a long time, it was still hard to get out of my brain. But part of the reason I wanted to mention that here is because one of the things that actually pushed me over the edge to talk to my doctor about it is because I heard someone on a podcast talk about it. It was actually 2 different times. I listen to way too many podcasts in a week's time. I have like a dozen that I keep up with every week. But 2 different podcasts, 2 different speakers that I just happened to listen to in a few weeks' time. They had both, I believe, been former pastors, and they were on somebody's podcast and mentioned that they had been on antidepressants of some form and how much that had helped them. And that, just having that visibility was enough to push me over the edge and say, okay, it's time. And I'm really thankful for people willing to speak out about such personal things because it helped to make a difference for me. And so hopefully I can pay that forward a little bit. And as far as I'm concerned, we're going to keep this going indefinitely. I think the 50 to 100 milestones are nice to just kind of give us a chance to reset, reevaluate. But all of those things that we just talked about aside, I do feel like we still have a lot to talk about. And I think I have a little bit of a renewed energy and purpose moving forward with this. I can't promise it is going to be neat or clean, but I mean, when have our episodes ever been, right? It's just about being uncut, unfiltered, staying curious. So I think that's what we have to look forward to in the next episodes as well. So with that lovely background aside, Jana, I have some questions for you about statistics for the podcast.
You know I love statistics.
Oh, absolutely. Such a statistician. I mean, that is kind of tongue in cheek, but she does at least once a week tell me, oh, we have this many followers on this thing or that thing, or you had somebody comment on this. I'm so thankful she does that because I don't always get the notifications. I try so hard to respond in a timely fashion, but I don't always get the notifications on time. So we have grown this year. We are still a very small podcast, but what I think is probably the most awesome statistic I have to share is that on just about every platform, we have pretty much doubled our followers in the past year. So,
Whoop.
yeah, I don't think Facebook, but Instagram.
Facebook is a dying platform after all, so
Oh, absolutely. I don't expect a ton out of Facebook ever. But Instagram, we have absolutely doubled on there, probably a little more. TikTok, I think, is a little under double. YouTube is well over double. Spotify has been well over double. I could not believe this. I just looked today, but we had a huge bump in Spotify listeners this year, like people actually following. And of course, the majority of our listeners are in the US, but according to Spotify, we do actually have some people in Canada that listen. And, people use VPNs and stuff. They travel. So anything that is under like 1% saying, oh, you have listeners in this country. If it's less than 1% of our total, I just kind of assume, it's probably a VPN or something. But we have enough of a number showing up in the UK that I think that's actually accurate, that we do have listeners overseas. And in fact, I'll share this when we get to a couple of comments that we've had in a few minutes, but I know we have had at least one person from Australia listening too. That's
shout
kind of
out
cool.
to Australia.
Absolutely. To our friends down under, thank you for listening. Jana, which podcast platform do you think has been the most popular for our listeners? Okay, so just for podcast platforms, our options, we don't have Google Podcasts anymore, but we do have Apple, Spotify, Amazon. This also lists Podcast Addict, so that I guess that's a more popular third party podcast platform. And then we have some others, that are just random ones. Like I think the one that I use is called like Podcasts or something like that. I want to look that up on my phone. Pocket Casks. Pocket Casts. There we go, with a T, not K. I don't know why that would be a K. That's for all your like funeral podcasts. The Pocket Casket. Never mind. All right, Jana, of all of the possible podcast platforms, what do you think is the most popular for people to listen to the pod?
I'm gonna say Spotify. I feel like that's the best option.
That's what I had thought too, but would you believe it's actually Apple?
Oh, okay. I
Most of
mean,
our podcast listeners are checking in on Apple Pods.
that's how I listen to my podcast because I have an iPhone, so I listen to it on
Yeah.
Apple Pod.
Yeah, so most of our listeners are listening on iPhones. I noticed that statistic on there. So we have a lot of Apple users that are fans of the pod for some reason. I don't know if this is going to make us lose listeners, but yeah, I'm more of an Android guy myself. But yeah,
Don't try
people
to
seem to
convert him. We've tried. It
no.
hasn't worked.
Yeah, people tried all through college and it did not work. But what really surprised me this year, and this has not just been our podcast, but this has just been like podcasts in general. The biggest area of growth has been on YouTube.
Yeah,
So,
we've gotten quite a few subscribers on there because I primarily keep tabs on YouTube because that's where
literally.
that's what I'm doing the videos for and all that. So that's just kind of my wheelhouse. But yeah.
Yeah, and since I have the account that like uplinks the actual podcast into Spotify and everything, I get their Spotify for creators roundups and all that stuff. And everything I am hearing people say is YouTube is the future for podcasts. People are actually getting to a point where they want to watch podcasts now. So that really started with YouTube, where you would just get people showing the video of the podcast. And now Spotify has a whole thing where you can put in video podcasts too. And so YouTube is the fastest growing place for podcasts. And we have absolutely seen that this year. It has been wild how much interaction we've had on YouTube.
Yeah, I mean, listen, I don't have a whole lot of time to keep up with podcasts like I once did, which is so unfortunate. But the one
Yeah.
podcast that I do keep up with is Eric Swarzinski's podcast, and that's because he
Yeah.
puts his
Shout out to Preacher
episodes,
Boys.
yeah, and that's because he puts his episodes on YouTube, and so I just add it to my watch later playlist because I
Yep.
am a YouTube addict. I watch way too much YouTube, but yeah.
Yeah. One thing that really interested me as I was looking at our stats for this episode is in general, as we have done the podcast, we have had about 56% male listenership. And again, that's very generic numbers because, people can just type in whatever when they sign up for the podcast. Like you could just hit a button wrong. It might not be representative. But in general, it's been about 56 to 65% male listeners. But that flipped for the first time ever this past month. Just in
What?
the past 30 days, we have had more women listening than men.
Hello, ladies.
Yeah, absolutely. I kind of want to know why. Like, if you're one of those women who has started listening recently, has that been because like we've had Jana on for more of
Right,
for
well,
more of the
you've
episodes
had,
recently?
yeah, you've had me,
And
you've had your
Sophia was
mom,
on there.
Sophia.
Yeah, yeah. So are we liking the female tones better than my voice, which I can't blame you for? Has it been content? I don't know. I'd love to find out. I also noticed that we are all across the spectrum on ages that listen, but our two most popular age groups for listeners are 28 to 34 and over
Interesting.
60.
Hmm.
So those are two very different groups that we are somehow appealing to the roughly millennial age group and then also the boomers. So
We
I'm
do,
not quite sure how that has worked.
I was gonna say, we do get some weird old people commenting on our YouTube. No offense.
We are going to get into some of those funky YouTube comments. I have those written down. We're getting there in a few minutes.
Oh, yeah.
All right, couple more questions for you here.
Hmm.
What do you think has been our most popular episode out of the 100 we have done so far? I'm talking
We,
across all platforms.
we're not including short form videos, right?
Correct. This is just actual podcast episodes.
Okay, because if it was the short form video, then it's our Antichrist video. That thing blew up. But you were saying some rather controversial things about that.
Okay, so you know what? I'll do a little audible here and pause because one of my next questions was going to be, what do you think is our most popular short? And so Jana already actually gave that away. 100% it is the Who is the Antichrist short. By
Yeah.
over 500 views, it beat out any of our other shorts, like 500 more than any of the other shorts that we have done. We don't, like I said earlier, we don't get a ton of feedback on our episodes, right? Like we're lucky to get a couple of comments on YouTube or whatever for the videos. That particular episode, do you want to guess how many comments that short has, the What is the Antichrist or Who is the Antichrist video?
Are we just talking on YouTube? Because we
Yeah,
get,
yes, on YouTube.
okay. Yeah, because we got a lot of comments
Y-
on TikTok.
yeah, you're
Um,
right, but I was just looking at YouTube here.
I think, because like I said, YouTube is my wheelhouse. I think
Mm.
we got close to 80 or 90 comments on that.
Currently sitting at 82.
Hmm. Now, that is also commenting your responses, which there was quite a
Oh,
bit of back
sure.
and forth as well. So,
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, like I'll just throw this out here. If any of you listen to the pod and you either don't watch our shorts or you just watch our shorts on socials, may I recommend you start checking out our shorts on YouTube because the comment sections on some of those have been pure gold.
oh my gosh. Yeah,
They
if you want
are
some entertainment.
glorious. Oh, absolutely. Another short that got a disproportionate number of comments is Did Jesus Use Drugs? That
Yeah.
one got some very entertaining responses. So while we're on the topic of shorts, I was looking at likes and dislikes. You want to take a stab at what was our least liked by percentage short so far?
I feel like I know this.
Honestly, this one shocked me. I was not at all expecting this to be, again, by percentage, so that can be skewed
Mhm.
a little bit, but most of our videos get, 80 to 100% on likes. You'll get the occasional couple of dislikes, but most of our people are pretty respectful and favorable in the community.
Uh, I'm not sure. I'm not thinking of anything.
Yeah, and I honestly don't think that you could have guessed this if you tried, because I know I could not have. It was one of our first shorts ever. Don't be an American tourist.
That's
That one is
great.
sitting at like 60% for likes. Yeah, so we almost have as many dislikes as likes on that. And tied with it is, where did Cain get his wife? Of
That's
all the
wild.
controversial things I have talked about, I would have thought, I mean, our Israel shorts had a couple of dislikes, but I really would have thought something like that would have had more dislikes, but the Don't Be
Right.
American Tourist and Where Did King Get His Wife, I thought those were relatively safe.
I mean, even your Antichrist video, that has a handful of
Right.
dislikes, but that also has, I think, like 24 likes on it.
A lot of likes, yeah. Disproportionately, people have been favorable toward that, at least on the like side. The comments, not so much.
Yeah. Yeah, comments are a whole other thing. Anyway, okay, back to the episode. Because we derailed
Yes,
a little
back to
bit.
the original question. What is
All right.
our number one most listened to episode on all platforms? So this
I
is
had,
including YouTube.
yeah. So again, YouTube is my wheelhouse. I'm just kind of going off of the
She's
numbers on
cheating a little
there.
bit. Yeah.
No, I have not looked. I have not looked. I swear. I swear, Mark. I swear. No,
Did not hit her. I did
I
not.
did not look, Mark. I did not.
Oh, hi, doggy.
Okay. All right. I think so. On YouTube, our Eric Swarzinski episode is by far the most watched episode. So I'm just gonna say it's the Eric Swarzinski episode.
You are absolutely correct. As nearly 400 views on YouTube, which I realize for most YouTube content creators is nothing. They get that in an hour, but for us, that's huge. And even across podcast platforms, it is also the most listened to by far. So then the second most listened to is just good old episode one. People starting at the beginning.
Whoop. That's what we want.
Yeah, I give a real shout out to those people, because yeah, obviously it's a free country, you can start wherever you want, but I purposefully have structured our content to make sense in a linear fashion. My ideal way to listen to the podcast is just from start to finish. So I really appreciate those people who are starting out with episode one. And then the third most popular so far is Tom's first episode with us. The God
Oh.
is God All Powerful episode, yeah. One thing I'll throw out too that has really excited me is how many of our more recent episodes are high up that list. Because that suggests to me that more people are coming in recently, and our recent content is drawing them in to where they're starting halfway, or just with whatever's recent. So that's exciting to me, that
Yeah.
some of our more recent episodes are already in the top half of our most listened to episodes.
Yeah, that's
All right,
encouraging.
Jana, you ready? Yeah, it
Yep.
really is. It really is. So thank you all for listening.
Hmm.
All right, Jana, you ready to get into some feedback we've had this year?
Oh yes, I love. I don't want to say I love comments, but they do entertain
Oh,
me
I
upon
do.
occasion. Yeah, he's a
Jana
psychopath.
just rolls her eyes at me. Yes. Okay, I am a high functioning sociopath. Do your
Oh,
research.
okay, excuse
All right,
me.
there's a difference. All right. I can feel things, Jana. I just don't act on it. That's the difference. But yeah, she'll tell me about some like super negative comment we get on something and be like, "Oh, do you want me to delete it?" I'm like, "Absolutely not. I'm about to have the time of my life responding to this person." It's fun.
Some of them, they sound like a crackhead, or I'm like, this comment doesn't even mean anything. Can I just delete it? No, I'm gonna respond to it.
Absolutely. I do not allow for any deletion of comments. Unless maybe it's like super vulgar or offensive, but thankfully we actually have not had that. We have had some really off-topic stuff. One of my favorites was when somebody just jumped in and said, Bible says Jesus is not God, on a video that had nothing to do about Jesus being God. So that was a classic. Somebody said I was worldly and I had no respect for the Word of God, which is obviously true since I spend all this time and effort studying the Word of God. So yeah, I'm sure I don't have any respect for it. One of my favorites, this was a response in our Progressive Christianity episode. That was also a really good guest we had on with Braden Storkerson. Somebody said, you have abandoned the essential tenets of Christianity, so why not go all the way and drop the label altogether? Why cling to it? And just the assumptions, because I was just letting Braden speak for himself as a progressive Christian there. Like, I didn't share a lot of my own personal views, but so the personal attack there was a little interesting.
Right. Well, in that case, are they talking to you or are they talking to Braden?
In the
Because they did
Braden,
not
right? I don't.
specify.
Yeah, I don't know, but I did respond to them, of course.
Yes.
Another favorite was somebody who, once again, we were not talking anything whatsoever about Islam, but they just responded on one of our videos. Read and understand the Quran. It's more useful.
Thank you.
Right. I have actually read the Quran. I'm not going to say I fully understand it. I'm not a scholar of the Quran by any means. I am a Bible scholar. That's my wheelhouse. And it is a useful document for sure. But I did not find that to be a very helpful comment. Probably my all-time favorite of any of the comments we've gotten in this past year, and this goes back to the who is the Antichrist, which I am telling you people, if you have not checked out the YouTube comment section on that, you are missing comedy gold. Somebody hopped on, they were going back and forth constantly on this. They told me I should go to a Gnostic mass in my local city to be proven wrong and to see what Christians call Satanism. It's just the classic oracular rites, and if you don't know what they are, then you haven't read the Bible.
I
Oh,
just I just wanted to know where we could go to a Gnostic mass. Like,
I know. I feel like I need to Google this. Like, where's my closest Gnostic mass? And believe me, I have read the Bible cover to cover many times, and I have never found any classical oracular rites of Satanism in it. So when Janice said a few minutes ago, some people come across like crackheads, and you thought she was a little too harsh.
I was
This is the kind
not.
of thing she was talking about. No, we got a lot of passive aggressive interaction this year. One of my favorite passive aggressive comments was, "Trust me, I have not tried to belittle you." Which, if you have to start off that way, yeah, you probably have. All I've tried to do is open your eyes. Once you have a true understanding, no other view can be right, and you'll take on any and all corners of false views, giving them truth. And of course, I was one of the false corners that this person thought they were giving truth to. Another favorite was somebody who said, some friendly advice. Get a haircut and grow some facial hair. It looks like someone dumped a bowl of spaghetti on your head. God bless, have a good one. Which, going back to our Ten Commandments episode, like, that is the definition of taking God's name in vain, is to throw God bless you after a comment like that. And I kind of went off on that person a little bit about showing all kinds of Christian hate for Christian love. And I will say, in their defense, they did actually publicly apologize on YouTube for that and walk back a little bit of it. But
Yes.
I did find that quite amusing. And then the last negative comment I'll throw out because I just could not resist is somebody who literally just said heresy, but they couldn't be bothered to spell check one word and spelled it Herecy. Just if you're gonna threaten me, do it properly. Like at
Yeah.
least spell the word right. It was not all negative comments this year. We actually had some really positive interactions with people. We had a lot of, I really enjoyed this, or this is a great video on specific videos. One person said, good message, upvoted, which I love that. Somebody actually said in a video, this is the Bible nerd I'm into. Not a let me tell you how right I am, just here's the history and why it's fun. Thanks. I love that. That was one of my favorite comments we've gotten on any of our content so far. We did, like I said earlier, we had a listener from Australia, which I apologize if you happen to hear this and you just heard me try to do an Australian accent. Like, I apologize profusely. That was embarrassing for all of us. But they said, I'm glad you posted this. Best of luck from Australia. So that was really cool. Shout out to our friends over there. Somebody said, I really want to thank you for being so insightful towards the Word of God. I hope He continues to bless your ministry as you continue to dive deeper into the Bible. I know you have Baptist roots and I am a Catholic, but I personally think you do a really nice job explaining Christianity's frequently asked questions purely through the lens of Scripture. And that was in a more private conversation, so I won't say who that was, but I will just give a shout out to that person because they reached out over email and we've had some conversations back and forth. They've also commented on some of our YouTube videos, and even though we do come from very different traditions and perspectives, they have been super respectful and nice and honestly just really encouraging. So they are the kind of listener that we love having, and I really appreciate those interactions. Somebody else commented on I forget exactly what episode this was, but I had made a comment, and this is not original to me, plenty of other people have said it, but it's along the lines of deconstruction is the revival that fundamentalists and evangelicals prayed for. They just weren't ready for it. And somebody responded to that and said, this stopped me in my tracks. I used to pray for revival when I was in fundamentalism. I'm 4 years removed from the cult, and I believe you are right. Although it has taken me a while to see it, breaking away from that harmful organization has allowed me to be closer to God and learn way more about Him than I ever did in church. And to be honest, your content has played a big part in my learning. So that was very meaningful. We got another comment that says, so good to see the integrity of study in this depth and sharing with other people. God bless you. We did get a lot of just basic God bless you comments, which are always encouraging. And some of my favorite too came off of when we did a short about art and specifically artistic interpretation in spirituality. Because I had a couple of different people on there comment things along the lines of, I was getting discouraged in my artwork, and this really encouraged me to keep it going. Or someone even said, this was just utterly randomly suggested to me by the algorithm, but I watched and I'm glad I did. I love that because every once in a while the YouTube algorithm gets it right and throws you some randomness that you like. So we had a lot of really great interactions with people. And this year I've actually had some people reach out over email and just say, hey, I want to talk about this. Like I had one person reach out and say, hey, I have some kind of unusual views on end time stuff. Can we chat about it? I'm like, yeah, absolutely. And we didn't agree on everything, but they were super respectful, super nice, and really put a lot of thought into their theology. So I love that kind of thing. It has been super, super meaningful to me to hear all of that. And I love getting that feedback. So whatever you think of an episode, good, bad, or if you have, pushback on something or questions about something, we love hearing from you. And I know I mentioned this in pretty much every episode, but I feel obliged to say you can always reach out on our socials, comment on YouTube, email cconn at thebibleuncut.com. You can email in through our website main page as well. And we do still have the Discord up and running. We haven't had a ton of action in there, but feel free to hop in that, and we have the links to that whenever we post an episode. We also post our episodes on Substack and Medium, just because sometimes we get a different audience there than we do on other platforms. So you can follow us there. We're also experimenting with Blue Sky right now. I don't know if we're going to keep up with that or anything, but I've noticed a lot of people migrating over there who don't want to be on Twitter anymore, or X now. So we're messing around with that. So if you're on there, feel free to give us a follow and reach out through that venue as well. Jana, I think it's time for us to talk about Theology Beer Camp. What do you think?
Yeah, absolutely.
All right, so Theology Beer Camp. Many of you may remember that last year was our first time going there. And while Jana went on the trip with me, she didn't actually attend beer camp itself. So I was just the one going to that. And you can check out our episode from around this time last year, where I go through a theology of communion and then also update on beer camp to get all my thoughts on my first time there. Because what stood out to me most last year was the communion service at the end. And so, me being a nerd, I had to go into all kinds of theology about it and then talk about it. This year, it was out in Minnesota, and Jana was able to go with me because I got to talk with Trip Fuller, who leads the conference every year, and we actually got to be one of the God Pods this year. So it is not just a conference for podcasters, but there are probably 20 to 40 podcasts each year that either attend or sponsor in some way or are sponsored in some way. And we were able to be one of those where, in our case, it basically just meant that we were on the website and got a little bit more notoriety with it. But that was a really cool opportunity where we showed up, and there were actually some people there this year who recognized us from the podcast. They're like, "Oh, are you Colin? You do that?" I'm like, "Oh, wow, yeah, like that was really cool." And then just getting to recognize some people from last year or that we've had on the pod, like getting to see Jonathan Foster and Tom Ward and Sarah Heath, Andrew Camp, Paul and Billy Horde, and several others where it's like, oh, yeah, I remember you now. Yeah, we saw Diana Butler Bass and James McGrath and Adam Clark, all these people where I'm like, I have no business calling you by your first name, but I can just be like, oh, hey, Adam, good to see you again or something. And, they just look at you like, oh, okay, yeah, sure. But, everyone's super nice. We had a good time with it, but we got to go do some different sessions, and it was different than last year in several ways. One being this was at a much smaller venue and there were more people than last year. So it got a little tight in some cases, but I mean, it's kind of hard to find a church that is willing to host something called Theology Beer Camp and has the room for hundreds of people. So I don't know what an official count was, but the number I heard being thrown around was roughly 600 people. So it was a really big gathering. So yeah, we were able to make it out to Minnesota a couple days early, got to tour around the area. We were
Yeah.
staying really close to Mall of America, so that was
Hmm.
super cool.
And surprisingly, we did not hear very many Minnesotan accents as I thought we would, but maybe we weren't far up north enough. I don't know if you guys remember or know, I'm originally from Indiana, so a lot of it was just Midwest culture, and it's like, oh, you just sound like you're, from Indiana.
I think some of that may have been just the fact that we were in the Twin Cities. Like we did not go outside of St. Paul and Minneapolis while we were there. So usually the cities are a little more diverse and you don't have as thick of an accent in cities as you do rural areas. So yeah, it's kind of
Unless you're in
funny
Philly.
because oh well, yeah, Philly or New York, all right. We've got our thick accents there. And maybe a couple of the bigger cities in California too. But yeah, like earlier this year, we took just a few days to make a trip up to Canada for my dad's birthday. We were big hockey fans, so Hockey Hall of Fame, hit up all that stuff in Toronto. I could not believe when we drove through North New York how thick the accent there was. Like, that sounded like Minnesota to me. There was more of a Canadian ish accent in North New York than we heard our entire time in Canada itself. So yeah, I was kind of surprised we didn't hear any accent out in Minnesota, but people were super nice.
Oh yeah, that well, I would say Midwestern hospitality, but
Yeah, I mean you can say that, but like I don't like Indiana. I liked Minnesota.
well, I was gonna say we were in Indiana at the beginning of this
Also
year.
earlier this year, we have done way too much travel.
Yeah, because my parents are both turning 60, so you gotta do something kind of special
Happy
for that.
birthday, mom and dad each.
Right.
Not that either of you are listening, but throw that out.
Yeah, and while we were there, I was like, man, I don't remember people from Indiana being this rude.
Yeah.
But yeah,
Yeah.
Indiana was recently ranked one of the worst places to live, so there's that.
1000%. Anyway, back to beer camp. We had a really good time just getting to explore the area. I have been a huge Peanuts comic fan since I was a little kid. Charlie Brown, Snoopy, all that. I literally have the entire collection of all 50 years of Charles Schultz's comics from the very first Peanuts he wrote to the very last one before he died. And I did not realize that he grew up right in that Twin Cities area where we were. We were like
Fake
our
fan,
Airbnb
fake fan.
our Airbnb that we stayed at was like 3 minutes away from his childhood home. And so there were all kinds of like Peanuts memorabilia just all throughout the city. There would be statues. There was an apartment complex we went by that had Snoopy's doghouse out in the front of it. So I loved that. It was so cool. But beer camp itself, Thursday is a lot of introductory stuff. We actually stayed for karaoke this year, which I didn't get to do last year, and we still end up leaving about halfway because by the time you get into like the later night hangout stuff, it's usually 9, 10 o'clock. We were an hour behind Eastern time, and I mean the thing starts at like 9 in the morning every day and goes to past 9 every night. So, we're trying to get some rest in there. We're exhausted. But we had so much fun with the karaoke. When they were finishing the opening ceremonies, Tripp called up Diana Butler Bass to give a prayer blessing to end our first day. And if you don't know who Diana is, she is a very prolific writer. In fact, she has a book that's coming out. Well, by the time this episode will be out, I think her book will be as well. And I don't even know which book this is for her number wise, but it's called A Beautiful Year. So I definitely recommend you check out her stuff if you're not familiar with it. She has a Substack that I have followed for a while now. But anyway, she gets up there to do this blessing for the congregation, this prayer. And the main theme this year was the quest for the Holy Stein, right? So it was based on Monty Python, Quest for the Holy Grail, and all this nerdiness, but really just asking about being human and what does that mean, and is there more to faith than what we have been taught? And so she starts off with this prayer and asks, sometimes it feels like, is this the real life or is this just fantasy? And then they throw up the words to Bohemian Rhapsody on the screen, and an entire congregation of 600 people in a packed out Lutheran church with the stained glass windows, high ceilings, all of this stuff. We are just belting out the lyrics to a Queen song as Tripp is running down the center aisle with a microphone and, practically doing Wayne's World to it. Like it was a perfect way to start the event. That had me cracking up. So Friday we start off with a session from John Dominic Crossan, who is a ridiculously intelligent scholar. The dude's also like 90 years old and looks and acts like he's about 70 max. Like he gets around like crazy. But he is so, I don't know, he just operates on a different level. Like whenever I listen to him, I feel like I retrieve about 10% of what he's talking about, because I always think, okay, I know where you're going with this. And then he just does a complete 180 and goes in the opposite direction of whatever I was thinking. But he was talking about the groaning of creation as a biblical account. That was really interesting.
As a non-scholarly person, I listened to that and I said, what? And I told Colin, I said, it sounded like he was advocating for this. And Colin was like, oh no, he absolutely was not. And I'm like, huh?
That's fair. I mean, that's also how I feel sometimes listening to him. But if nothing else, he has the best accent ever that just makes him so much fun to listen to, even if you're not understanding what he's talking about.
Listen, he had a very nice accent, but I still did not have fun in that session. But
It's
also,
not for everyone, okay? Yeah.
but also the pews were probably the most uncomfortable pews I've ever sat in my life, and all I could think of
Oh, yeah, that
was,
is true.
when can I leave?
We did end up standing up for any other sessions in the main auditorium because those pews were the hardest wood that you have ever sat on at the worst angle possible. But yeah, going into the breakouts tend to be what I look forward to most in beer camp at this point, because while I do love the theological nerdiness, I am not a theologian. I am a Bible scholar. And so even someone like Crossan, as brilliant as he is and as much as I appreciate his work, it doesn't always hit exactly with my, I don't want to say my interests, but my focus, right? The things that I'm most comfortable with. So I enjoy listening because I do learn from him, but we just operate in such totally different wavelengths. I often find that the breakout sessions are more like deconstruction focused or more down to earth. So I sat in on a session with Dan Koch and Myron Penner on Is Religion Natural to Humans? This was really fascinating conversation, and I think if I'm remembering this correctly, Phil Clayton may have been in that as well. I think there was a change to who was up on the stage there, but Dan Koch is an awesome guy, host of formerly the You Have Permission podcast. Now it's called Religion on the Mind. But it was this really fascinating conversation, just asking about, isn't inherent to humanity to have this belief in something greater than yourself? And they went in a little bit of a different direction with it than I thought they would, and I found their arguments pretty compelling, so I really enjoyed that. And I think this was probably Jana's favorite breakout as well, because she was over in one with a guy named Brian Recker talking about a brand spanking new book called Hellbent. So you want to tell our audience a little bit about that?
Yeah, that was a really good session. It was jam-packed. Almost everyone wanted to go to that one, which understandable. Brian is a sweetheart.
Oh yeah.
I ended up standing in that one because lack of room, and number two, I was like, I cannot sit. I'm just sick of it. Anyway, yeah, so Brian came from Independent Fundamental Baptist like we did, although
Yep.
his sect of Fundamental Baptist was okay with going to Bob Jones. I did tell him that
Right.
I did tell him that my sect of Independent Fundamental Baptist was not okay with Bob Jones.
It kind of depended on the person. Like the church I came from, we had some kids that went to BJ, but the school that I went to where Jenna and I met, they looked very poorly upon BJ, which is kind of funny since they were only about 2 hours north of it, and we actually poached their music teacher for a while, one of their music teachers, but that's a whole other story that we are definitely not getting into here.
Oh, yeah, that's a whole roller coaster ride.
It's a cluster.
Anyway, yes. Yeah, so he was just talking about some of his experience in the IFB and discussing some of the views that they hold on hell and just how emotionally and psychologically damaging that can be, especially for young children. I found it very interesting. I really appreciated it. I understand some of our more conservative listeners are probably not going to appreciate his view. If we have any conservative listeners, I don't even know if we do.
We definitely do, and it could be triggering to some of them with some of
Yeah.
the views he presents on hell, but the way he presents it is both from a lens of strong biblical scholarship because he himself was a pastor for a while,
Mhm.
and also a very emotionally intelligent approach of looking at psychologically how doctrines have affected people and just following the belief of what Jesus said that you can judge a tree by its fruit. We have to look at not just the good or the bad, but the whole of what particular doctrines create in their results. And that should come into play of whether we consider a doctrine to be accurate or not as well. But that's a whole other thing that I'll just say we'll get into in the near future if it piques your interest.
Yes.
The next main session was with Kelly Brown Douglas, who is, again, another incredible voice in Christian scholarship. And she's done a lot of really good work, and she was talking about what price freedom there. So the next group of breakouts, I actually did not get to sit in on. I was trying to listen to the Friendship Across Fandom with Casper. I am not going to try to pronounce his last name because I don't remember the proper pronunciation, but he is the host of a very popular Harry Potter based podcast. Tripp was in that. James McGrath was in that because he, I am learning, is an awesome nerd. And it was supposed to be about like Lord of the Rings and Harry Potter and themes of friendship and also just finding that in all these different nerdiness things. But I was helping out with some of the bottle share and beer tending, and so I ended up getting called away for that. I didn't get to sit in on that as much as I would have liked to. But Jana got to hang with a friend of the podcast that you may recognize from earlier this year, Steve Thomason, the art pastor.
Yes, yes, I did. And I did not tell him who I was or that I was affiliated with this podcast. I just didn't get the opportunity to. Yeah, so he talked about some of his art for a little bit. He showed us a piece that he had talked about when he was on the podcast as well. And that session was a bit more relaxing because we actually got to make our own piece of art. Now, we did not get to finish it because of time constraints, but it was basically just where you make a shape and then you put little doodles inside and then you can color it and stuff. I I did a triangle. I do have pictures of my doodle and a couple other people's doodles, which maybe we'll post. Maybe. I
Up
was
to
not
you.
very I was not very proud of mine because mine was a triangle with weird doodles and the woman next to me did a whole cat shape and doodles inside and hers looked fantastic and mine just did not.
I
But
mean, that was the whole point of doing that thing, though, was like it wasn't about making the prettiest art. It was just about relaxing and expressing yourself in that way.
Yeah, and I was relaxed for sure. I was 2 pints deep into beer, so that also may have
We
helped
did
with the
enjoy the beer part of
relaxation.
Theology Beer Camp for sure.
Yes, yes. So yeah, but that was a very, very nice session. Not a lot to report.
Yeah. And Steve is a fantastic guy. I was kind of surprised when I was looking at analytics that his episode was not as high up in our listen to list as I thought it would be. So if you have not checked out, I think I called it The Art of Faith or The Art of Spirituality or something like that. But we had a fantastic conversation together, and he does some incredible artwork. So if you haven't checked that out, make sure you do that. It was a
I
really good conversation.
I highly recommend watching the video because I did a lot of
Yes,
work and I found the
she
artwork
did.
that he's talking about specifically, and I did a lot of fancy little transitions and zooms in it, so it would
Yes,
just
well worth.
it would make
Yeah.
me so happy if you go and watch it.
And then just leave a comment on the YouTube video, like who's here from the 100th episode. Listen, yeah,
Or
absolutely.
just
That
say,
would
"Good
be
job, Jana."
yeah, yeah, yeah. She deserves it for sure. The next day, we had a session with Phil Clayton, who was actually Tripp's dissertation advisor, another genius thinker, and I think he'd probably be labeled as a theologian. But he took the groaning of creation concept and took it more cosmic than as compared to Crossan's more biblical account of it. And I think, Jana, you appreciated this angle a little bit
Yes.
better.
I really enjoyed it because he started out in the back by us where we were
Hmm.
standing, and I was like, "What is this man doing?" And then he had like a whole slideshow presentation where he showed different pictures, and it was just so captivating to me. And
Yeah.
I was just so enthralled by the fact that, he had this whole presentation of pictures. He could have been standing up at the front, that would have been
Hmm.
totally acceptable. But the fact that he just wanted everyone's attention to be on the presentation and he's like, I'll stand here in the back and just narrate was so interesting and fascinating to me. And he did such a phenomenal job with that.
Oh yeah, you could tell he was a skilled professor. He had a very captivating teaching style, and he knew how to get your attention for sure. So that was enjoyable. And the next breakout was probably my favorite of the breakouts because I sat in on a conversation with husband and wife team Juan Floyd Thomas and Stacy Floyd Thomas, which also had Kelly Brown Douglas and Adam Clark and Will Rose, who's moderating it. But this was an entire session based around Ryan Coogler's movie Sinners that came out earlier this year. And I I honestly considered doing an episode on Sinners like we did with Heretic because it was just that good. It is honestly, in my opinion, one of the best movies of the decade. I know we're only halfway through the decade, but to this point, and probably of the century to this point, like I would put it in my 100 best all-time movies list for sure. It is a vampire movie, but it is not like any other vampire movie. Like even if you're not into horror, it doesn't lean into it too much. It's just a fantastic drama, action with a little bit of horror sprinkled throughout and especially more toward the end. But anyway, love the movie. And so when I saw they were having this session on Sinners, I told Jana right away, I'm like, if that means the movie, I am going. And it did. And it was just, aside from Will, who was moderating, it was an all black panel. And if you've seen the movie, it's a very black prominent movie as well. And just the insights that they gave through the lens of black theology and considering how that played into this movie and just looking at some of the musical history and biblical parallels, it was incredible. So much so that while I was sitting in the session, I texted one of my friends, Channing. He's been on the podcast several times now. And I texted him, and I knew he had watched Sinners, and I said, "Yo, we need to rewatch Sinners and talk about this ASAP." And so we did. Like a week after we got back, we had him over, and we rewatched the movie and chatted through everything that I had on my brain from that. So absolutely love that session. And Jana got this in with yet another friend and guest of the podcast previously, Jonathan Foster, for Mimesis and Mimosas, which might win the title for best breakout session name of the week.
Yes, and we did have mimosas, and it was so entertaining watching Jonathan open a champagne bottle because he was terrified of it. Listen, I'll be honest, I only went to that for the mimosas.
Love the honesty here. Okay,
Uh,
this is the difference when a Bible scholar and a layperson attend beer camp. The takes are very different.
my motives were not pure. I just wanted a mimosa. Which he said, if you're just here for the mimosas, that's fine. And I was like, cool, that's great. Because I honestly did not understand much of his class.
You have heard Sheldon on Big Bang Theory talk about mimesis. That's all the explanation you need.
No, I just listen, I was just focused on the mimosas and how can I get another one? So it kind of drew my attention away a little bit. I had also had a little bit of a rough night, but I was just focused on getting another mimosa.
After that, they had one more main session where Stacy and Juan Floyd Thomas got up and talked about cultural divisions and digital dystopias. That was really fascinating. I missed part of that because I had to go help out with some of the beer tending, but the parts that I heard I was very interested in, and I definitely want to go back and listen to more of that when they upload the full recording. And then they had a one last breakout session where I went to Generation Gap Culture Hour, which was pretty much just a Patreon recording for Dan Koch's podcast with Tony Jones and Josh Gilbert. And that was really fascinating to me because they all come from very different places where you have each one of them being representative of a different generation, and you could even see the political differences where one of them leans much more conservative, one leans much more progressive, and Dan kind of ends up in the middle in a lot of ways. Like, out of all the people at beer camp, he's probably more on the conservative side, even though more conservative people would not welcome him in their groups. And just hearing the way that they all disagreed and yet still dialogue very respectfully, and even when they were taking questions from the audience, we're talking about difficult topics. Like, I mean, heck, Charlie Kirk came up really fast in the conversation too. So, not pulling any punches, but just hearing the way they were able to dialogue and disagree and still be friends was actually really encouraging. And that's one of the biggest things I took away from this year for me is just I got to see how much of a diversity there was with progressive Christians, Baptists that we met, Methodists that we met, Lutherans, Nazarenes, unaffiliated, people who are still pretty evangelical or were still attending evangelical churches. And yet we all got together and I came across another podcast in this whole process of being at beer camp, and it's a husband and wife couple who are Southern Baptists, actually, and they call their podcast "But Is It Biblical?" And this was their first time at beer camp. I was listening to their recap on it, and just the way that they talked about how much we say we want unity in the church, and if you truly want unity, you should be praising something like beer camp because that is the best example I've seen of people of different beliefs, mostly within Christianity still, but getting together and just enjoying each other's company and enjoying the debate and the disagreement and still being able to take communion together and sing together and have fun together. It was so much better than any of the isolationism that I was used to in the circles I grew up in. So that was definitely a big takeaway that I saw highlighted in that breakout.
I went to contemplative composting with Mike Morrell. I really enjoyed the session, but I also really there are a few things that annoyed me. So the room was extremely hot and people were coming in late to it. And basically, the entire session was going through different meditations, which I absolutely loved, right up my alley. And he started off with a meditation, but people kept coming in, and I really wanted to strangle them during my meditation because I'm like, I'm trying to meditate. Stop coming in. And plus, the room was hot and just a lot of people were in that, but I did really enjoy the meditation, and it was really interesting seeing different people's responses to like actively checking in with their body. Obviously, in independent film of Baptist and a lot of evangelical Christian circles, checking in with your body is not a thing that you are taught or that is encouraged. In fact, a lot of times it's ignore your body and how you're feeling and everything. And so it was just very interesting seeing different people's reactions to checking in with their body. One woman was like, I have a lot of chronic pain. She said, focusing in on my body just showed me different areas where there was more pain that I didn't know about. And she's like, it was honestly a very unpleasant experience for me. And he said, well, yeah, obviously he validated that. And he also said that there were some people who said that focusing in on the pain actually helped relieve it. So it's just very interesting seeing different people's reactions to that. It was a shorter session because he ended it early so that he could catch his flight back. But I really enjoyed it and I thought it was a great way to end my time at beer camp.
I also forgot to mention at the start that we both sat in on pregame stuff as well. And mine was hosted by the same people that did the pregame that I was at last year, Seattle School of Divinity. So that was with Paul and Billy Horde and a couple other people that were in there as well. And it was on fugitivity and just not feeling like you are welcome in spaces anymore, and really just asking what if there's more to faith than the binaries that we had been given before. And I enjoyed my session quite a bit, and I love the perspectives that those people brought into it. And I actually ended up sitting next to, well, on one side I was sitting next to Billy, and then also a friend that I had connected with at last year's pregame for the first time. He ended up coming in a few minutes late and then sat down right next to me. And so we would do these little kind of breakout things where it's like, all right, talk to the person next to you for like 5 minutes about whatever. And so he and I just ended up going back and forth a lot, and we had not talked individually as much last year as more in a group, so I didn't realize just how much we had in common of some of our backgrounds as well and some of our experiences. So that was actually really encouraging. I liked talking with him, and we got a bit closer and exchanged numbers and everything. So it was not as well set up as last year's. There was some confusion around lunch and all those different things, but we ended up going into, I say into the town. I mean, it was walking distance, but it was raining, so we drove just like 2 minutes down the road and found this incredible Thai restaurant. And when we were waiting to be seated, I looked over and saw Tom Ward sitting there. And I was like, yo, Tom, good place to eat. He's like, yeah, absolutely. Like, oh, cool. We'll talk later. So yeah, that was kind of cool. We did have some awesome food while we were out there. That's not what we're here to talk about, but I will just say we were eating good that week. But
Yeah,
yeah, my pregame.
we could spend a
Oh
whole
yeah,
another half hour talking about the food, honestly.
yeah, absolutely. And some of you are going, yes, please do. And most of you are like, no, you've drawn this out too long anyway. But yeah, so that was my pregame, and what was yours on?
Mine was a very heady session about really what it boiled down to was just mental health and I don't know. I was having a little bit of a rough day that day. I was overwhelmed by everything. I had a lot of anxiety because Colin was in a different session than I was, and as Colin just mentioned, our lunch plans were totally messed up. So my group was going to like, you know, Grubhub something, and for whatever reason, I could not get my Grubhub order to be paid for. And so I just like freaked out and
It was a lot to take in.
yeah,
It's very overwhelming when you're surrounded by all these people of
that you
different
don't
beliefs
know.
that you're not used to, that you don't know,
Hmm.
and you're talking about very personal stuff very fast. And like the circles we came from, you learn not to trust people because they're not trustworthy, but you're still asked to give a lot of yourself. And
Yeah.
here they're more respectful, but to get the most out of it, you do still give a lot of yourself. And there's kind of a little bit of PTSD of like, can I actually trust these people when I don't know them?
Yeah, and I'm getting better with trusting people more quickly, but it still does take time, and I was feeling very
Yeah.
overwhelmed, very emotional, and so I stepped out, had a good cry, and then we went to lunch, and I felt better after lunch, and we when I went back because they just continued the session with, you know, probably like a 15-minute break for lunch, and then
So I had an hour and a half for lunch.
right. And then,
Very different setups.
yeah, while you're eating lunch, they're still talking about their course and everything, and which they were not great with breaks. But, I mean, they were kind of going like, "Oh, do you want to take a break now?" "No? Okay, all right, we'll just keep going." And I'm just like, "Well, yeah, I kind of do, but okay, since no one else seems to, it's that people pleaser in me." Which, I mean, they were very understanding. They're like, "Oh, if you need to step out, step out. If this is really overwhelming for you, like make space for yourself and take that time
Yes.
and
I do
everything."
love that about the whole beer camp setup is like they realize everyone's coming from different places and like you're talking about being overwhelmed. You were not the only one. When I went for the first time last year, there were plenty of times I stepped out. Even this year, there were a couple of times I stepped out just to get fresh air, and like nobody looks at you funny. They know you're there to better yourself, and so if that means sitting in the session, great. If that means being contemplative on your own, great. If that means just walking out and getting a beer refill and some fresh air, great.
Yeah. So when I did go back, they did some exercises which I really loved. And the woman that I was sitting next to, she's a bit of a like life coach kind of thing and very familiar with some therapy terms and everything. So we were both able to express, "Hey, here's where I am in life right now, and here's some things going on," and just, sort of give insight into some ways to help each other or, to really start processing some things that maybe you haven't processed before. Overall, it was a very good session. It was very overwhelming. I'm not entirely sure all of what I learned, and obviously, you can see I'm struggling to fully communicate what it was about. Yeah, I would have to go and get my papers and be like, "Well, here's the questions that we did, and here's what my handout
Oh yeah.
says." But yeah.
It's a lot to take in, and those sessions. What time did we start? Like 11 in the morning or something?
Yeah, it was early,
It
and
may have
it
even been
was
earlier.
it
It
was,
was like
well, we arrived a
it was
little
definitely before 11.
yeah, and we arrived a little bit late because we had been out to breakfast with a friend, and then they didn't get over
Shout out
until,
to
like
Andrew.
yeah. Yeah, we were out to breakfast with Andrew.
One of the best breakfasts we have ever had. You know what? I'm gonna what was the name of the place? Do you remember? I'm gonna pull it up because not like we have people that are out in Minnesota listening, I don't think, but if you are anywhere near this,
Yeah,
oh, you know what?
even if
Yeah,
you're,
I'll
like,
pull
a
up your
2-hour
Insta.
drive, it's
Oh
totally
my
worth it.
gosh.
I promise.
I would fly out to this place just to eat there. Ah, there it is. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Okay, so this was something I know we said we weren't going to talk about food, but we have to talk about food. This was something I just found off of Google, just looking for like best breakfast near me kind of thing, right? I was like 10, 15 minutes from where we were staying. So yeah, I don't care if you are anywhere near this or not, you need to make the trip. It is called Wise Acre Eatery. And it's basically people that own a farm and then just use all of their farm ingredients as the food for the restaurant, like the eggs, the meat, the greens, the potatoes. Like they have a little farmers market. When I say farmers market, it's a super small place, but like they're selling their own produce too, right in there.
It was
Oh
so good. It was
yeah.
some of the most fresh food I have ever had
Hmm.
with microgreens and pickled veggies and fresh veggies and oh, it was well,
Get the breakfast
yeah,
sandwich. Yeah,
I got the breakfast bowl. Amazing. Absolutely amazing. Even if you're like, I don't know if I really like veggies. Ugh, these were
I don't give a
delicious.
crap. Get it anyway. Yeah,
Yeah,
it was the best thing in the world.
yeah. Oh my gosh, I cannot talk enough about that place.
Oh, seriously, yeah. Major shout out to Wiseacre. They were incredible. And to Andrew, our friend over at Biggest Table, for meeting us up there for breakfast because we just absolutely had to go a second time while we were out there. But yeah, anyway, the pregame went long too. It started at like 10 a.m. or something ridiculous and then went to I think like 3 o'clock or something. So they were long sessions. There was a lot covered. It was definitely overwhelming, but good material. And that's kind of how beer camp is in general, is just overwhelming but good material. We had a good time overall. There was a lot to digest, a lot of really good people we got to meet, good people we got to catch up with again. So that's beer camp 2025, our first time being a god pod. And with that note, I guess we will get into the last section here on what we have to look forward to. All right, we have chatted for quite a while here, and if you are still with us, thank you, thank you, thank you. We want to give you a little bit of a sneak preview into what we have coming up in the next year, because I am getting super excited about our upcoming content. I have been working really hard on just seeing what will make the most sense to have next in the pipeline. So for the rest of this year, we're going to have some more one-offs and maybe a short mini-series. I am still looking at doing a mini-series on King James Onlyism. I know I promised that last year when we were doing the Scroll to Screen mini-series, and I am still looking into that. I want to make sure, because that was such a big part of my life growing up was King James Onlyism, I want to make sure I'm doing proper justice to the arguments and presenting the best case that I can for why I am no longer in that camp. So I'm not 100% sure exactly when we're going to air that because I still want to refine my study a little bit, but we are still working on that. And I think we're probably going to end up doing more track record in the upcoming year. We have a lot more pamphlets to go through and a lot more fun to be had with that. But I think it's time we give a little teaser here of some brand new info for our listeners
Whoop
of what
whoop.
they have to look forward to. Yeah, yeah. So, every January we do spiritual abuse awareness and we have on some guests to talk about it from different angles. They have been some fantastic episodes. I mean, the first one, the inaugural one we had was with Eric Skorzynski. So, I mean, you're not getting much better than that for a way to start it off. And then we've had some great conversations, with our friends Chris and Rachel, with Pastor Jimmy Hinton, Jonathan Foster, and several others. So, we are going to be continuing that series in January, and we have some brand new guests. I already have 3 specifically lined up for very different angles on spiritual abuse than what we have talked about before, and probably 1, possibly 2 more for that. We have some stuff that's still up in the air, and like I said earlier, I don't like to give too much info ahead of time and overcommit just in case something doesn't quite work out, but trust me, they are going to be some fantastic episodes. And then we're going to break tradition a little bit right after that. We're not going to hop right into a Bible series. We're going to do a little bit of a topical study, probably through the whole month of February. We're looking at probably 4 to 6 episodes that are going to talk about a theology of food. Because this is, as you heard us talking, we could not stop bringing up food when we're trying to get through telling you about beer camp. We are both foodies. We love being able to find great spots. And I mean, heck, living in South Jersey and half an hour ish from Philly, like we have all of the possible good food places. So, in spite of that, I never really learned any kind of theology of food. That wasn't anything we talked about in the circles I grew up in or when we went to college. So I have been learning in the last couple years that this is a whole thing where there is a lens of food and drink that you can look at theology through. And it really gives a whole different perspective than what you're going to hear in church most Sundays. So I've been really affected by this, and I find it super insightful, a very different perspective than what you're used to. And I have already booked a couple of friends that we have not had on the podcast yet, but I've been wanting to have on, and we're in talks about getting those episodes planned. And I have several more people I'll be reaching out to in the near future here to get that done. So I am really excited for that mini series that we're going to have. And then last little teaser I'll throw out here is we do already know what our Bible series for 2026 is going to be. and we are still staying in the Old Testament for at least one more year. I know some of you are probably wondering, when are we getting to New Testament stuff? All right, well, again, you have to know the Old Testament to get into the New. So, if any of you thought, oh, he did Genesis first year, Exodus second year, no, we are not doing Leviticus this upcoming year. That may
Boo.
come if we. Did you say boo?
Yeah, I'm just kidding.
What is wrong with you?
I don't know. I would
If this
probably
keeps going and
I would probably fall asleep editing though, so
oh yeah, absolutely. Not really. There is actually really really interesting stuff in Leviticus, but we're not going there yet. All right, that's for way off in the future. If we do this until I die, we'll get to Leviticus eventually. But we're going to jump further ahead in the Old Testament to the book of Nehemiah. This is a book that you don't usually hear preached in church unless there is a building project or a men's retreat that is happening. And neither one of those is what Nehemiah is about. So I really enjoy this book, and it was honestly kind of revolutionary for me in some of my Bible study because it turned out to be nothing like what I thought it was actually about. So I am really, really excited for getting into Nehemiah with all of you in 2026. And on that note, it is again time for us to close out our 100th episode anniversary celebration here. So I don't know when we'll do our next milestone episode. I mean, 50 is a big milestone, 100's a big milestone. I don't feel like 150 is really a milestone. Like, I feel like maybe 200 has to be the next one that we do a special for.
yeah, probably.
Yeah. But either way, I just want to say a big thank you to those of you who listen, whether you started listening when we put out the first episode or whether you just came in this week. We could not do what we do without you. And I love being able to hear from you, get feedback on where you are in your faith journey and what you think of our content. If you learn anything, if there's anything you want us to talk about in the future or questions you have, like this is something where we are trying to build up a little bit of digital community. And what we have seen so far, yeah, we've had a few of those negative comments we talked about earlier, but we really seem to have built a solid, friendly, respectful community so far where most of the people who comment on things seem to be very genuine and respectful, and I really appreciate that because we need more of that in this world. And so I just want to give a huge thank you to all of you, and I am super excited about what we get to share with you in the upcoming year. I hope you stick around to be part of it. Jana, you have any final thoughts?
Thank you for listening to us and our sometimes crazy episodes. Yeah, we appreciate everyone's support so far.
Absolutely. And so on that note, I was discussing with ChatGPT the episode that we were planning here and just trying to structure my notes so that it made a little bit more sense. And in the conversation, I ended up getting kind of an Irish style blessing out of ChatGPT that I thought was just way too good not to share with the audience. So I'm going to close out our episode today with this AI generated blessing for you all, tailor made for our podcast. All right, you ready? To the guests who made us think, to the comment threads that made us drink, to the listeners faithful through and through, to the Bible uncut and unfiltered too. Stay curious, keep those questions in store. Cheers to 100 down, and here's to 100 more.
Well, amen. Thank you to our robot overlords.
I, for one, am grateful for our robot overlords. You've been listening to the Bible Uncut and Unfiltered. We hope we provided a healing place to discuss the questions you can't ask and the context you won't learn in church. If you enjoyed the podcast, would you take a minute to share it with a friend? You could also rate and review on your podcast app. If you'd like to donate to keep our work going, you can go to our website, thebibleuncut.com, and click on the Support Us tab. While you're there, check out the recommended resources and blog where we post show notes and other articles. Thanks for listening. We'll see you next week.